Yeah, let's get started, Judy. We've got a group that's joining, okay?
Yeah, okay. All right. So, and we're thankful for Lolita being with here and hanging out with us early on. So, hope you've had your coffee and welcome to everyone. There is a question on the screen that if you want to begin responding, if there's, I'm not seeing others in the chat at this point, given that we've already talked to Lolita, but there are some others in the room now. So, good morning. We really would like your response to what makes you feel hopeful and encouraged about your current financial situation. So I'm posting that in the chat box and hope that you'll feel welcome to respond, but welcome to the next installment of Leading and Learning. We're hoping to share with you tactics and tips today that'll help you move forward in your nonprofit. Welcome and glad you came to be with us this morning. Just a little bit of etiquette around what to do here in the Zoom environment, because it's maybe a little bit new for some and certainly not so much for others, but we're going to use the chat box pretty exclusively just to be able to manage so there's not a lot of voices trying to speak all at once. And we hope that you understand that we'll have you muted, but the chat box will be monitored. There's at least 3 of us watching that. If it's possible to put your video up, we'd love it, because seeing your face is part of the way that we can connect. And if you want to be on speaker view, you can see who's speaking in the moment. Then you'll see the faces of our speakers. So, and I'm seeing the chat box starting to light up. So thank you. Here's our agenda for this morning. After we go through some of this information, then we're going to move into the topic of today, which is balancing mission and margin in the environment of COVID-19. There are a number of opportunities when we're going to ask you for questions, but all the time that we're on here, please know that you will be seen in the chat room. So feel welcome to let us know what you're thinking. And with that, I will introduce that certainly the 3 of us, Carrie Hammerman, Yodit Mesfin-Johnson, and I from NEW are happy that you're here. I'll also say thank you on behalf of NEW, of our wonderful partners, COAC, Detroit, and Charnay, who is with us this morning. Usually Kyla and Alondra join us as well. So if you want to say hello to them, even in the chat box or any of us, we welcome your messages, and thank you for coming to join us early in the morning. Those of you that don't know as much about NEW, I'll offer that we do a lot of services to work alongside all of you as leaders in the nonprofit sector to help your missions to move forward. And this series of chats is meant to help in a perhaps more challenging time than normal, but the nonprofit environment has always been a little bit of a challenge for getting enough money and having enough people doing our missions. So know that NEW offers a variety of services might be able to help you. Carrie, do you want to go over our norms, please? I'm going to see also if I can get that mark off the screen. I don't know what's going on there.
Sure. So I welcome all. If you've been at our earlier sessions, these may be familiar. So I'll go through them briefly because they are important. Our norms, you know, in this environment, we do ask for grace, patience, understanding for technical glitches. Thank you, Judy, for erasing the line on the screen. Things like that happen, and we appreciate your understanding as we go through. We will get us out of here on time. That is our commitment to you, that get you onto your day by 8:30. And we ask that you practice self-care in whatever ways are meaningful for you. You're in different surroundings, and children and pet are certainly welcome. This is a really meaningful experience if you are present, if you engage, if you're participating in this. So we ask you to take this opportunity to just don't get distracted by your email and other things. Take a moment to be here and be present and practice deep listening with us. At the time, we don't have long, so we'll use one voice, one mic, and we encourage you to use the chat feature. As we say, we'll be monitoring it to bring your voice into the conversation and to offer opportunities for you to communicate and share with one another. And If there are things that are uncomfortable or that you're unaware of, just lean in, ask questions, and come in with a sense of curiosity. And why we're here, just to make sure we're all on the same page. This set of series that we've had really came about for a few different reasons. One, to increase the connection among the nonprofit leaders here in Southeast Michigan to create a stronger network, and to provide this really critical wisdom, resources, and support to you as leaders who are managing nonprofit operations, teams, and programs during this really challenging time for all of us. As we're here, we hope this brings a sense of togetherness, camaraderie, and trust. And for that to happen, we really encourage all of you to share and to be part of this. It's intended to not be a passive experience, but also to come away with some actionable ideas and tips and tools that you can be able to use. So that comes from sometimes the speakers and sometimes from you as the participants in the program. So thanks for being here.
So again, today's topic is balancing mission and margin amidst COVID-19. Yodit, would you like to introduce our speakers?
Sure. Good morning, everyone. My name is Yodit Mesfin-Johnson, and I serve as president and CEO of NEW. Actually started January 5th. And I can tell you that pandemic management was not on my job description. So like many of you, we at NEW have experienced this wild ride that is far-reaching in our sector. I think the disruptive effects from the pandemic we'll be feeling for a really long time. And I benefited greatly from the collaboration and partnership of Ben Williams, our CFO, who I'm proud to introduce to you, and also our partners at UHY. So Ben came to us, I don't think he anticipated this either, after a prestigious 28-year career at Ford Motor Company. I think he thought this might be like his glide path, and oh, did he get a rude awakening. But Ben led finance and strategy and financial operations. But mostly what I appreciate is that Ben understands that we exist as nonprofit organizations to advance our missions. We are not businesses. We are organizations that have come together in the spirit of democracy to help solve problems together. And while we do need to have business plans and strategic plans, understanding the balance of mission and margin is definitely a gift that Ben has brought to our organization. Similarly, Erica Battle, who's a CPA at our partners at UHY, has helped manage and grow their nonprofit industries practice for over 6 years. Before that, she worked at Gilda's Club in Metro Detroit, one of the most powerful collaborative organizations, the Detroit Chamber Winds and Strings. Those folks were doing innovative work around nonprofit management 25 years ago, and the DIA, the Detroit Institute of Art. So we're super glad that they're both with us. I know that they're gonna bring a lot of wisdom. They're gonna make what would usually be what we think is a dry subject, they're so passionate about it, they're gonna make it interesting. And I think, as my colleague said, please lean in, use that chat box, ask as many questions, and let's make this time together as powerful as we can. Thanks, everyone.
So with that, Ben, if you want to take it away.
Sure. Yeah, and please, I could talk about this for a long time. So tell me when I need to wrap it up. Just let me know.
Okay, I'll come in and kind of say, hello, Ben.
Okay, yeah, I appreciate that.
Thanks.
So, as I start this, just, I was thinking about what does balancing mission and margin mean to me? And I think Yodit said it very well. To me, it's really the mission is everything. And particularly when you're in the nonprofit space, you're doing really critical things for a community, and we need to have those things be done as a community, and sound financial management, however, has to be there in order to support that. And so that's, to me, that's what it's what you need to do to make sure you can accomplish that mission in terms of having sound financial management. The other thing I'd like to say is, as an introduction, is, thanks Jody for telling a little bit about my background, but, I spent 28 and a half years at Ford Motor Company. I was there running the finances pretty large part of the organization during the 2009 financial crisis. And so a lot of the lessons that I learned as part of my career at Ford, I've found apply, really apply even to a small nonprofit in Ann Arbor. And you do them differently. You do them more effectively and efficiently. You don't have hordes of people to help you with it. But I think the basic things are the same. And I've kind of brought those, to my role at NEW. The other thing I'd like to just make sure that is that at NEW we do a number of things, but we also provide financial consulting and bookkeeping and fiscal sponsorship for our clients. So I am starting to have some interaction with my clients, and I find that these principles work with them as well. So let me just start with the basics. And some of you might say, well, some of this stuff is very basic, but quite frankly, I found on this first one, I didn't initially put it on the list, but in working with one of my clients, we wanted to really do a deep dive on their financials and help them to understand what was going to be, what their sustainability was, and how they could improve their financial management. And we found as we dove in that we couldn't even start because they didn't have good books. And so this first principle, I think, is really critical. And you as nonprofit leaders, I think if you're not doing it yourself, obviously you need to make sure that you have good financial partners and that you're helping them and making it a priority that the books are closed every month, that the expenses are accounted for, that they're up to date. So when you get to a position like a crisis or some other plan, some other point, you can actually look at your financials and know where you are. Because if you don't know what to do. So I just want to emphasize to start with that how important I think keeping good books and good bookkeeping practices if you're large enough and you can afford it, have an audit is just really critical. The other thing, the next one is liquidity. And I had a lesson back in my day at Ford when I was sort of a youngish corporate finance manager, working on some corporate issues with our corporate treasurer. And I just told him something about, we've got all this extra cash. Why don't we do this or that or the other? And he told me, look, as treasurer, there are only 3 important things that I worry about: liquidity, liquidity, and liquidity. And so, when I joined NEW, and Yodi will say she was new and I was new, and I looked at our sources of liquidity, and my initial reaction was, this isn't good enough. And so we went, and even before the financial crisis started, we started to work on that, including credit lines and cash. So the first thing we did was, can we expand the credit line? That's something we can do more easily, perhaps, than cash, and we did that. And then as the financial crisis hit, we were really, pulled out all the stops to ensure that we could have the appropriate liquidity and the amount of liquidity that we needed to manage the crisis and get through the crisis. And we're lucky enough to be able to have done that, thanks to a lot of good work on the team. But this is something, 3 to 6 months of cash is typically what it needs to be, or credit lines in combination. But really, I'd say a critical thing. The next thing I talk about is forecast. So, you know, I've 30 plus career in finance. You know, your forecast is you know, a critical element of your process, and it starts with understanding and making sure you know what the run rate of your business is, right? So you know month to month what's happening, how much revenue is coming in, how much you're spending, and therefore you can predict kind of what the next several months are going to look like. And it's great to have a plan, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But if you don't, you know, have a forecast process, a lot of times you're not on your plan. Maybe your plan is you know, something is happening, but understanding what that month-to-month run rate is and then how to project that out, really important. And then that needs to get to cash, right? So it starts with what's the profit, but then what are the other things that are impacting cash flow? And I think Erica is going to talk a little bit more in detail about that. The other thing we've used at New, particularly as we've gotten into the crisis, and I don't know that you need to have this all the time, but I would say when you're doing a business plan, when you really are in a crisis opportunity, I use a process called the risk and opportunities. When I was at Ford, that was part of the process every month, part of the forecast. So here's my forecast, but what could happen and what can you do about it? And that's kind of where you start with trying to understand what's going to be, you know, what's going to be happening to you when you get into a crisis. For example, you may not understand everything that's going to happen, but if you start to, like, just a risk and opportunity is a brainstorm. And then as you're putting down your opportunities, you think about everything. So Erica will talk about some of those things as well in terms of what to look for to start to generate additional cash. When you look at your balance sheet, try to find what you know, what promises, for example, you can turn into cash, what assets you have that can be sold or something like that. And then business planning. Again, business planning is something you don't do all the time. We're in the middle right now at New at doing our forecast because our fiscal year ends in June and starts in July. A little bit difficult to do that in the middle of a in the middle of a pandemic. But it brings again another lesson, which is, you know, from my days at Ford, you always have to have a plan. You can't get anywhere if you don't have a plan. You're not going to get to where you want to be without a plan, and your plan's always going to be wrong, right? So a business plan on the shelf is no good. A business plan that is active and that you understand you've got a plan, now you got to figure out month to month to month what's actually happening and adjust to that to stay on your plan. And that means, you know, having some kind of a process. It can be, you know, depending on your size, you know, involve your team in that process to understand where you are. You know, I had the opportunity at Ford to work with and be close to Alan Mulally, who was one of the best leaders I've ever seen in my life. But his process was for this was something he called the business plan review. But part of the business plan review, the secret was you can't manage a secret. And so you had to understand what was going on with the business. You had to accept your reality and then decide what you were going to do about it. So I think that's one of the important lessons that I learned about business planning. And then finally, you know, through all of this, as I said, stay aligned to your mission and your vision, and the future. So even in the midst of the 2009 crisis at Ford, in which case we had to take a lot of really tough and difficult decisions. For us at that point in time, our mission required we had to stay on top of investing in new products, making sure we had, vehicles that were going to come to market, thinking about the emerging markets where we needed to continue to invest to grow our business. At New, and in your case, it's how are we going to continue to invest in our clients, our constituents, the folks that rely on our services. What we're doing right here is one of those things. So at New, we have a number of areas of work where, the revenue stayed pretty steady, but we had some others where it as part of the crisis started, consulting revenue was going to drop off a bit. These sessions are a way for us to accomplish our mission and really stay connected to our vision for the future. So those are the kinds of things. Look for those opportunities to make sure, even in the crisis, you are accomplishing what you want to accomplish and need to accomplish for your constituents. So I think hopefully that's good enough for now, and hopefully I have time for a Q&A later. So should I turn it over to Erica?
Actually, no, I'm going to turn it over to the group to see if we might have some questions for you or some comments. So everyone, if you want to type into the chat box, we've been kind of typing some issues there already, but how many of you might have 3 to 6 months of cash reserves, and what are you doing to understand how the COVID crisis is impacting your cash flow? I've been typing actively here with Jordan, who has a year in reserves, which is lovely. They are volunteer driven entirely. He's with the Flint Regional Science and Engineering Fair, and he's talking about the fact that they have this reserve, but they actually have very low, if any, expenses. So he and I have been going back and forth. They do have expenses, of course, but when comparing it to the value of the in-kind donation of volunteer time, it's relatively small. We'd love to hear from some of the rest of you about what you have going on. Lolita, thank you. You don't have 3 to 6 months of cash reserves, so certainly from Ben's advice, that would be something to think about and develop a policy and process for, perhaps.
Hey, Judy, can I
Yeah,
offer
go ahead.
that I do want to acknowledge that I think we know, particularly now with the pandemic, we know that many organizations, in fact, most organizations don't have those reserves. So I think it's exciting to hear that Jordan's organization does. I'd love if in the course of the conversation, if Ben or Erica might talk a little bit about some strategies, something Ben and I are working on, so maybe Ben can talk to that, some strategies for building those reserves. I think it's both systematic in that we are often, hand to mouth as organizations. We're relying heavily on restricted grants and funds that have to be directed towards specific programs. So we are seeing a shift on the part of the philanthropy community to releasing that operating capital. But I hope today we'll, maybe if Erica or Ben have some ideas. One person in the chat, Lenore, says, we don't have the cash reserves and we're struggling to build them. It's difficult given that the revenue stream has been significantly reduced. And I think lots of us are definitely experiencing that. So if over the course of the next half hour or so, our speakers could talk to that, or even others can talk to it, I think that'd be helpful, and acknowledging that it's really challenging.
And I think I saw Erica raise her hand. Erica, did you want to jump in and offer something on this topic?
Yeah, so building cash reserves, you can't just say, oh, I want this to happen. You have to make it happen. And there's two ways that I've heard of that have been very successful. One is to, and this time this is not as practical, but in regular economic times, is to actually make that a campaign. You know, we do capital campaigns to do it, make capital improvements, but a couple organizations I know have built in campaigns to build cash reserves. One was Alternative for Girls, and that really kind of turned around their whole financial plan, as they led a very successful campaign to build reserves. And another was a small organization in Troy called On My Own, but they made it actually a targeted campaign for the year and were able to walk away with some cash reserves. And then another way to help do this is to actually put a line item in your budget. We operate so close to budget, you know, but you need, if you put that in, and granted it can be a cushion if you're having trouble, but if you put it in your budget that you need to build, you know, your cash reserve, it helps keep that in the forefront. And so often organizations just run money in and money out, you know, but if you put that in the budget, it makes you think about it every month when you're reviewing your budget to actual, to see if you're getting enough money to cover that. If you have a lot of capital assets, make sure that you keep depreciation in your budget. It's a non-cash item, so sometimes organizations for management purposes pop that out because they don't have to come up with the cash to cover it. But if you keep that in, again, it helps you set aside that cash because it's a non-cash item. Ben, do you have any other thoughts or ideas on that?
Yeah, I would. I'd say one thing is to make sure you understand what your assets are and whether there are things that you can turn into cash that you have, right? So whether it's a physical asset or a set of promises. So when you get into the pandemic, for example, one of the things that Yodit did was, well, we had a number of commitments that were out there. Well, she went and turned those commitments into cash, right? So, take a look at what capabilities you have where you can sort of, turn things into cash that otherwise, sit on your balance sheet if you have a balance sheet, but there may be assets, whether you don't have a balance sheet or not, maybe assets that you have that you can monetize in a way. There's really good proper management of things like, receivables and payables, right? Depending on what kind of operation you have, maybe you don't have those. Well, make sure you're taking advantage of your full amount of time you have to pay your vendors, right? Make sure you're collecting if people owe you. So there are things that you can do as well to just look at and understand what your business is and whether you have assets that you can turn into cash.
Let's move on to Erica's content. And everyone, the chat box is always open, and we will be doing another few Q&A sort of opportunities. So Erica, why don't we have you move forward on talking about your items? Oops.
Okay.
There we go. Thank you.
So once, we were all starting to have to stay at home and organizations were closing and businesses were closing, cash flow forecasting became a really important topic. I'm on a few boards for some smaller nonprofits, and of course, I'm the treasurer because everyone wants the CPA that knows about nonprofits to be on the board. And we immediately had to do some cash forecasting to see if we could maintain payroll, which is something interesting. As we've worked through these PPP loans, the nonprofits were all about making sure they could keep their employees engaged and keep them paid and keep doing their work. And then I see my for-profit partners were the first thing to go were, to lay off the employees. So it's so interesting how different our worlds are. But a lot of the nonprofits, their primary goal was to keep staff engaged and keep them paid. So we had to do some quick cash forecasting. So even as we're making it through this shutdown and we're getting ready to reopen, I cannot stress how important it is to continue to do your cash flow analysis and your cash flow forecasting. You should be forecasting 12 months out with a rolling forecast. And you really should always be preparing for the worst case scenarios to make sure that you're always prepared. The nonprofit community has been very lucky. It was interesting. I was working with another partner at UHY on some marketing materials, and he was saying, well, these nonprofits have probably been hit up really hard. They probably don't have any money right now. And I said, well, you know, it's interesting. The foundation community has really stepped up, and nonprofits have been eligible for these PPP loans, never before eligible for SBA loans. So they've actually been doing okay compared to the small business owner. So I'm more concerned for the nonprofit sector as we start to feel the lingering economic fallout of this situation. So I think we've been fortunate getting these PPP loans, and some of the foundations have been escalating their grant payments and setting up new grants. But we don't know what's going to be happening as we go into the fall, or we go, you know, into next year. So continue to prepare for the worst case scenario. So when you do your cash flow, and probably, you know, at this point in the game, we've all been working on this exercise, but really take a hard look at what your monthly cash disbursements are. What is absolutely required? You know, again, during the shutdown period, a lot of us were not using office space, or we weren't on site. So, you know, I had a couple organizations that are like, well, do we need our cleaning service? I'm like, well, you probably don't need your cleaning service as much as you had before. Do you need your trash pickup as much, you know? So really determine what is required to keep your organization going. You know, if you have certain programs that need to be done, what is required to maintain those programs? What do you as a nonprofit want to make sure that you're still doing, and what impact you're making? Figure out what that is, and figure out what those cash requirements are, so that you can start to build that cash forecast. And then, of course, the next step in a cash flow is to really take a hard look at your cash receipts. You know, if you are donation based and rely on a lot of public contributions, you know, you need to really think hard about this. Are there any revenue streams that are sure fit monthly inflows? Do you have a donor that's giving, you know, monthly donations? Have you checked with that donor to make sure they're going to continue those monthly donations? Do you have other revenue streams? You know, one of my organizations, I'm on the board, the Scarab Club, which is a arts and culture membership organization down by the DIA. And they're lucky that they have in their facility, they actually have some artist studios that those artists pay rent. So there was that cash flow that was going to continue. You know, they weren't able to do any of their events, their donations, they weren't pursuing donations as heavily, but they know that rent was going to come in every month. So, you know, make sure that you're only putting on your cash flow secured cash sources. And then again, as I said, when I first started talking about the cash forecasting, when we started the stay-at-home orders, review the payroll. You know, at one point, you know, we're good with these PPP loans. That's going to cover everyone at 100%, hopefully, you know, during this 8-week period. Once that's done, you know, take a look at your reserves and your run rate, as Ben had said. How much is out there? How many months can you continue? You know, is it good to, you know, if we continue to have rough economic times and we're not working at quite at full capacity, do you reduce wages by 90%? You know, what's more important, to be able to maintain your operations for a year at 90% and keep everyone employed, or, you know, to go for that 100% and be out of cash in 3 months? You know, so just different scenarios. You need to talk it through with your executive team, with your board. Again, I'm concerned that we're going to continue to have economic hardship, so we just continue to plan ahead and be conservative with your forecasting. So other considerations, as Ben had mentioned, you know, you need to look at your balance sheet and see what's available. It's so many nonprofits get these restricted funds, and we're really supposed to keep those held off to the side. We're not supposed to be using them to manage liquidity or to cover shortfalls. You know, they're supposed to be held for those programs that you need to do. But if you have a lot of restricted programs or funders that might have a little leeway, you know, talk to those funders and see if you can reroute some of those restricted funds to maybe cover some other programming that's more imperative. Our programming has changed. You know, what was a cool and interesting program, you know, 6 months ago might not be as necessary now. You know, we might be doing basics now. We might be, you know, working on food distribution or new programming that is more relevant to the community at this point. So if you had a restricted donation that was to do something that might not be necessary now or align as closely with your mission or with how your mission can help us through these times, go back to those funders and see if you can reroute the restrictions or change the restrictions to something more relevant to your current operations. Again, assessing cash disbursements, you know, make sure, see what vendors are providing forbearance. You know, a lot of the mortgage companies were good. They said if you were paying mortgages, you know, that they would defer some payments. Some places were deferring rent, you know. Once you start to talk to the vendors, you'd be surprised sometimes how accommodating they can be. So if you are in a cash crunch, you know, take that as an option as well. The Paycheck Protection Program, you know, again, make sure you're forecasting the forgiveness. If you were lucky enough to get a PPP loan, you know, that did come in at based on 2.5 months of salaries, but it's, you know, you can only cover 8 weeks of salaries for the loan at this point. And then, you know, rent and utilities and such. Make sure that you're running those numbers now so that if you have to give some of the money back, if you don't get to use it all, you want to know what that is before your 8 weeks is up. So stay on top of that. Assess your development plans and practices. You know, so many nonprofits rely on that big special event, that big gala to get money sometimes. You know, so hopefully you have a good development director, you have good development advisors that can help you figure out how to change those things up and figure out different ways to get that money. A lot of times people are sponsoring your events, not necessarily because they, you know, because they're excited to go to one more gala, but because they support what you're doing, you know. So a lot of times, you know, you might want to look into doing a sponsorship for maybe, you know, an event that's not going to cost you as much money, you know. So there's been a lot of creative things going on out there in the community. I know that you guys are all probably clued in there and have seen some of it. And then a lot of us, not a lot of us, but some of us have endowments. And endowments are always kind of a sticky item for nonprofits. And, you know, it's a great idea to get that big bulk of money set aside and hopefully, you know, be able to live off some, you know, investment earnings. But really, to be an effective endowment, you have to grow it to such a level that it's not, oftentimes it's just tying up your working capital. So, you know, if you have a large endowment, you can look into borrowing from it. Make sure you're talking with your board and your attorneys. And then what I have some smaller nonprofits where they had a donor that wanted to give an endowment. You know, you can, once an endowment is set up, that does not mean that it can't be redirected. So if that donor is still out there and they wanted to give money to an endowment, you know, you might want to consider talking about them and letting them know how important that working capital is, especially if you're in a cash crunch. And sometimes they can release the endowment or release the restriction on the endowment so that you can then throw that money back into your working capital. So those are just some things to think about. And again, make sure that you're talking with the funders. You never want to redirect funds without the funders' blessings and approval to do so. Because technically, in the accounting world, if you're not using them for the restrictions, they technically should be going back to the funder.
Good point. Thank you, Erica. Time for some questions. I think we talked a bit about this 3 to 6 months and, you know, the whole aspect of reserves, but there are people typing up in the chat about a couple of things about how they're doing some things. I'm also going to put up this other slide about next steps. So would love to open up the conversation about what are you all hearing that resonated with you today from what Ben and Erica shared. Ben, did you want to comment on what you just posted in the chat box? That's interesting.
Oh, I just, there were folks were chatting about the fundraisers, and it just, I'm on the board of the Ann Arbor Academy, which is a private school for children with learning differences. And we normally have a spring auction, which is a big event, and we weren't able to do that this year, obviously. Turned it into an online auction with a couple of Zoom events, and we actually set a record for fundraising with that event. So I think it just, don't shy away. I mean, if you have things that you normally have done in person, I think it just tells me the community is ready to give and support and participate in ways other than just your typical in-person event.
Marian posted here in the chat box, our organization's revenue relies on grant-funded fee-for-service projects. Some funders allow us to invoice for an advance for admin and expenses prior to the project. What do you think of taking advances on future projects? So Ben or Erica, do you have some advice for Marian?
As long as you're in touch with your funders and talking them through, I think this is a great idea. Again, we don't know what's coming down the road. So the fact that that funder is allowing you to go ahead and take that advance, I think it's clear to set expectations, like what happens then if for some reason the program never kicks off. Are they allowing you to keep that admin and expense piece? That might be their intention, or that might not be their intention. So just be clear on what that is in case something happens down the road and that project doesn't take. It sounds to me like they might have just been convenient to let you use a little bit of operating cash to get through. But it's, again, that's going to be a funder by funder decision on how they manage that. So don't assume all funders will have the same scenario.
Yeah, just make sure it fits with your plan, right? So,
right.
If you have a financial plan that says, here's when the cash is going to come in, and then you can plan for the expenses to actually execute the project, then cash flow is cash flow, right? So, but I think Erica has some really good points in terms of things to watch out for.
So Lenore is bringing up the issue about your reference to the endowment, Erica. Have there been others that have had success in using their endowment, and what are the pros and cons in doing this? Do you want to speak to the pros and cons, Erica?
Yeah, so, I have a few clients where they do have loans from their endowments on the books from when I'm doing their audit. So I know it's out there. Again, you need, sometimes that happens inadvertently, where an organization had no other option but to liquidate some of those endowment investments to maintain operations. But if it's something that you're thinking about doing, again, talk with your board and your attorneys to make sure it's okay. And what then becomes the problem is then paying back that endowment loan. Sometimes you get in that cycle where you're just living, paycheck to paycheck, so to speak, and you don't have the excess or those cash reserves to then pay back the endowment. But if you have an endowment and you have no cash and your option is that you are going to go insolvent, that is something you should be seriously thinking about, to try and borrow from that endowment, or even take steps to maybe, convert the endowment if possible. But it is done. There is actually accounting guidance for it and stuff like that. So it's not as uncommon as you would think.
So I'm hearing a number of things, Erica and Ben, that I'm hearing you say that actually are impactful information that board members need to hear about policies and procedures, or when certain things trigger responses, either on behalf of the board, voting a resolution to say, tap the endowment, or look at some forecasting options, different things that the board of directors needs to know, separate from those on this call that are executive directors, CEOs. So do you want to speak a little bit to some of the behaviors, some of the work that could go back now to a board of directors, given what some of the nonprofits are learning from the current scenario and what they might do for planning?
Yeah, hopefully your board, you know, has contacts that can be helping with that. You know, if you don't have an attorney on your board, maybe you have someone that knows an attorney on the board that can help. Whenever I talk to a board or go in to present an audit or work on consulting, I always remind the board that it's their names that are on that 990. You know, we don't put the staff, you know, we put the CEO, we might put the CFO on the 990, but it's the board who is listed on that 990. So they are the ones ultimately that are, you know, charged with governance of the organization and the financial health of the organization. So they need to be kept apprised of what's going on. If you're making major decisions like in borrowing from an endowment, you know, they need to know about that, and they need to be providing their approval, because ultimately you don't, as a staff member, want the full burden of that falling onto you. That's why you have a board of advisors.
I just say, you know, I think with working on financial issues with your board, I think it requires that you be fairly strategic in terms of how you bring up those conversations, and so that you have really good, productive conversation on the issues that matter. So I've seen too many financial conversations with boards where, you know, the ED or the finance director just kind of brings in a bunch of statements and says, here they are. And I think then the board just kind of swims around in, well, what's this item and what's that item and so on and so forth. And so it takes some time and work, but you know, you want to make sure that you're bringing the conversation up to the strategic issues. You know, make sure that the board has access to your statements, but that shouldn't be the focus of the conversation. It should be, what are the critical issues? What are the decisions that need to be made? And you know, spend the time preparing for those discussions so you can, you know, help your board focus on those things. And then they can be of greatest benefit to you, I think.
And I always recommend, even if you have a small board, but have a finance committee, because a lot of times you have people on your board that might not have financial knowledge or really understand the finances. So if you can have a finance committee that really is doing the deep dive and the guidance, they can then be the, you know, the presenters of that financial information, because you don't want your board meeting to be talking about all these board members talking about your finances. That can take over a board meeting quickly, you know. So if you have a finance committee that's pretty much just saying, you know, we're dealing with the issues, here's the FYI, what you need to know, you know, and then only really reserving board involvement for real critical issues that need them to chime in. So if you can do a finance committee, by all means, put something like that together to help be more strategic and kind of minimize that back and forth that can sometimes happen.
Yeah, and that's what we do at NEW as well. We have a finance committee. So and you know, that can be really helpful in particular, you know, when you have you know, a finance director or as an ED, you can get, if you can get some other folks that have financial expertise in your finance committee, then you get the sort of the power of some additional some additional expertise, you know, which is always helpful to make sure you're not you don't have blind spots on things you could be doing.
Well, and I can attest to the fact that as a board member, I have had the benefit of not only people around me who help with like directing my attention as a board member, like, note that the donations are down this month. Why might that be? And you know, our expenses have dropped, thankfully, because of what the staff are doing, but we need to look at, we're understaffed and blah, blah, blah. So, you know, taking it to the more strategic level for the board so that we're not to the point of you know, I think Ben said it, in the weeds, like getting into all the nuts and bolts of why is this higher this month? You know, going into the detail, which on the boards that I'm on, we do some of that in the finance committee meeting, but we really have worked hard not to get to that level on the board. So to that point, for the people on the call, thank you, Erica and Ben, you know, for pointing out some of the things that as executive directors and CEOs helping to frame everything and to target everything so that the board is looking at what matters. Makes a lot of sense. Thanks. We're going to keep the chat box obviously going and watching for people to respond, but I also, you know, the time is coming near here. Are there any sort of broader questions that those of you on the call want to ask Ben and Erica before we're getting closer to our wrap up time, but I want to open that up and offer, so Marian is typing up, she typed in, our organization's revenue relies on grant funded. Oh, I already did that one. I'm sorry. There's new questions coming up in here, so I'm trying to follow. Yeah. Reflecting on critical issues, what decisions that need to be made. Thank you. Anyway, so type in your questions. I'll watch that chat box and see if anything comes up. I'm going to move forward with some of the announcements and things. So I typed in an evaluation link, so I'm hoping that those of you that came this morning will look at that. I wanted to point out, Sharnae, do you want to unmute and talk about some of the upcoming events at COACT?
Sure. Thank you very much, Judy. Thank you, everyone. Just a quick upcoming programs update, and you can find more on our website on coactdetroit.org. But we do have a federal grants management in a rapidly changing world webinar, actually today at noon. There's still a few spots left, so if you're interested, you can definitely sign up for that. The link is on the slide, and also you can just go to our website. That will be a great resource, just kind of learning more about major grants and loan programs available from the federal government, as well as we're also having our meditation, guided meditation happening at 9 to 9:30. So that's also today, every Wednesday from 9 to 9:30. And I invite you to also just join in, definitely during this time caused by the stress from the pandemic and the recent events happening in our country. We definitely invite you to just kind of acknowledge your feelings and slow down in a safe space. So please feel free to join us for that. And the last thing that's not mentioned, but you can find on our website, is our Collab Connect program. And that is also happening on a weekly basis, where we invite you to just come in and register for an appointment to meet with different subject matter experts, whether it's on capacity building or legal matters, where we could talk for 45 minutes and really just help co-create solutions to some of the issues you might be having. So definitely please check out our website for more. Thank you, Judy.
Yeah, thank you, Sharnae. And yes, the COACT partnership in Detroit, a wonderful organization and partners that are brought together to help the nonprofit sector here. So please look into that website. Future dates, just to give you some information about our next session is June 17th, again at 7:30. We're going to be, and I neglected to type up the sort of title, but we're bringing together some fundraising leaders who are going to give us some information about how they've shifted and adapted to the current environment and what their thinking is moving forward, not only in recovery, but the adaptations that are causing them to rethink a lot of the way we've done fundraising. So we don't have a fancy title yet. We're working on that, but watch your email. Certainly reach out to Ananya, who you've received emails from, if you want to get updates about that. And we will be posting information about it always on our Facebook. I'm seeing some final comments here. Lenora's saying, any suggestions on high-level bullet points to share with the Finance Committee and the board? I find that it's sometimes hard to read the minds of what people are looking for, especially when there's a very diverse board. So Erica or Ben, do you want to speak to high-level bullet points to share?
Sure. You know, what I've done with New is you know, really sort of focused on the key, you know, the key metrics, right, of what's going on with your revenue, what changed this month versus last month, and for example, or you know, what's going on in terms of versus the budget. You know, revenue, and I think you need to keep it to, you know, the one or two things that are happening with revenue or income, one or two things that are happening on the expense side, and then cash flow, and the level of cash, right, that's available. I mean, those are so pick those 3 or 4 or 5 metrics that are the most important and try to, you know, and focus your conversation around those.
Right, and I think budget to actual should definitely be being reviewed. So if you've got those 3 revenue lines and those 3 primary expense lines, how are you stacking up on your budget to actual? Because that should be a discussion and on a moving analysis, you know, where you're so preparing a good management report to share at your board meeting. It shouldn't just be that balance sheet and that income statement. You really need to figure out what is good information to share. And usually report I put together is a budget to actual, a projection, so that you can find out where those shortfalls are going to be, and if you need to identify a different revenue line to try and pick up or a different expense to cut back. So it should be it should be a constant review every month to see where you're falling out with that budget to actual and what you need to be doing to hit your numbers.
Yeah, agreed.
Excellent. Thank you both.
So in fact, what I'd say is sort of our report, those things that I talked about are the you know, the key pieces, right? Start with the performance and the key budget to actual and the run rate of the business. What's the forecast for the cash flow? What's the, do you have any risks and opportunities that you need to be managing? You know, so it's, you know, those are the key things that you know, use those processes with your board.
Excellent. Well, thank you. So we're on our time. Certainly I'll stay in the room for a little bit and leave things open if you want to. Ben and Erica, if you want to turn your attention to the chat box in case people have questions for you, but in honor of starting and ending as much on time as we can, I'll let you all go. Those of you that need to run off in other meetings, thank you for being here. And again, stay in touch with us. You'll be getting a follow-up email with a recording of this session. The resources that are on the screen right now are just part of what I've received from our speakers. So Erica, or I'm sorry, Sharnay and I are working toward creating a document for you that'll be a longer resource document. You're receiving that in the email as an attachment with the recording of this session, another request for you to do an evaluation for us, and a request, if you would, to support this effort with your donation to help us to be able to offer a thank you to our presenters. They've given us their time here. So with that, I'll say thank you. I'm going to stop the recording, but those of you that want to stay for a minute and ask Ben and Erica some questions, we're grateful that you're here and happy to continue some level of conversation while we move out of the room. So thank you.